The 70 candles on the birthday cake flickered brightly in the spacious room. Laughter and the clinking of glasses echoed everywhere, but to Josephine, it was all just a fragile disguise. She stood at the center, wearing an old wine-colored dress, her hands trembling as she lit the candles. With each flame that rose, she felt another year of her life burn away. Around the table, smiling faces, relatives, neighbors, a few old friends offered polite greetings and hollow compliments. Only Ethan, her only son, sat silently at the far end of the table. His eyes were cold as steel, dissecting her every movement. Josephine looked at him, searching for a trace of the warmth she once knew, but all she found was a half-smile, sharp and venomous. Just as she raised her glass to give thanks, Ethan stood. The soft ting of his glass striking another sliced through the chatter, and the room fell silent. He looked around, his voice calm, clear, and chilling. "I just want to say a few words. Congratulations, Mother, for living long enough to become worthless." The room froze. A few sharp breaths broke the stillness. Someone coughed, then stopped. Josephine stood motionless, her fingers still holding the glass mid-air. Ethan went on, his tone light as air but cuttingly cold. "Mother, you have no value left. Even this house won't belong to you for much longer." A nervous laugh flitted through the corner of the room and died instantly. Josephine remained there, her lips trembling but no words coming out. In the glow of the candles, tears welled up, but she forced them back. She smiled strained, brittle, like an actress compelled to continue her scene, even as the stage collapsed around her. The last candle burned down, dripping a bead of hot wax onto her hand. Josephine flinched but didn't pull away. She could feel herself melting bit by bit beneath the mixture of pity and cold indifference in every watching eye. The house sank into silence after the last guest left. The balloons slowly deflated, rolling across the floor, while the scent of wine still lingered in the air, bitter and heavy, like a wound refusing to close. Josephine began clearing the dishes, picking up crumbs and bits of cake. Her hands trembled, not from fatigue, but because something inside her had just shattered. She glanced at the mirror in the dining room, an old woman with silver hair, sunken eyes, and a thin layer of powder that could no longer hide the wrinkles. "Useless," Josephine murmured, her voice barely a whisper, carried away by the wind. The word burrowed deep into her chest, echoing like a curse. Outside, rain began to fall quiet, relentless. Droplets slid down the window pane, catching the dim yellow light. Josephine walked slowly to the shelf and poured herself the last of the wine. She took a sip. The bitterness spread across her tongue, then burned down her throat like fire. On the wall, the family photo hung crooked after the party. In it, 10-year-old Ethan beamed, holding a wooden plaque he'd made himself, carved with the words, "Mom's little hero." Josephine traced the photo with a trembling fingertip. "You once said I was your hero," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Now you say I have no worth. When did that change, Ethan?" A draft slipped through the doorframe, stirring the curtain. Josephine shivered. She sank into a chair, holding her glass close, staring into the emptiness ahead. The house that once overflowed with her son's laughter now felt like a hollow box. The clock on the wall ticked 11 dry, hollow beats. Josephine closed her eyes, hoping sleep might come, but it didn't. Her son's words kept echoing, cruelly clear in her mind. "Mother, you have no value anymore." She buried her face in her hands, trying to muffle the sound of her sobs, but the tears still slipped through her fingers hot and raw, like ashes. The night dragged on, heavy and relentless. Josephine lay in bed, eyes shut, but her mind racing. Outside, the rain tapped a monotonous rhythm against the roof, each drop piercing her thoughts like a needle. She had always believed that the worst pain a mother could endure was losing her husband. but now she knew there was something far worse: losing a child who was still alive. A soft sound broke the stillness. Click, clack, faint, but unusual. Her eyes opened. The noise came again, steady from downstairs. Instinct gripped her. Something was wrong. She sat up slowly, wrapped herself in a robe, and stepped barefoot down the stairs. The wood creaked under her weight. The house was dark, except for a sliver of light leaking from under the office door. Her heart pounded. Josephine pressed her ear to the door. She heard the spin of metal, the grinding of gears. She froze. It was the sound of her safe. Through the narrow opening, she could just make out Ethan, crouched in front of the safe. His shoulders were tense beneath his rolled-up sleeves, face taut with focus. The desk lamp cast a harsh glow, highlighting the beads of sweat on his brow. Click. The safe swung open. Ethan swiftly pulled out a stack of papers, some envelopes, and a small wooden box. His eyes flicked over the contents, and then it came, that glint of satisfaction, followed by the familiar, cutting half-smile. Josephine stood motionless. The air around her felt frozen. Every second that passed sliced deeper into her chest. She had imagined her son becoming successful, strong, but never like this, hunched over her safe, in the dead of night, like a thief. When Ethan closed the safe, the harsh clack echoed like a blade through her heart. She backed away, gripping the stair railing to steady herself, choking back the sob rising in her throat. Her vision blurred not from fear of losing money, but because she understood. In that moment, whatever was left between them had been broken beyond repair. The house returned to silence. Only the ticking clock remained, each beat a cruel reminder that tonight, a mother lost her son in the most painful way imaginable. That night's rain was no different from the countless storms of years past, loud, relentless, drumming down on the rusted tin roof of the small apartment in the suburbs. Josephine sat at the old wooden table, patching a customer's shoes by the dim glow of an oil lamp. Its flickering light cast tired shadows across her face. On the bed nearby, 6-year-old Ethan lay curled up, his soft breathing barely audible in the cold night. She looked at her son, her eyes softening. Her body ached from the long shift at the restaurant, but she still managed to smile. As long as he was safe, every pain felt worth it. She whispered, more to herself than to anyone else, "As long as you grow up strong, I could die and still be at peace." Outside, the rain began to leak through the roof, dripping onto the floor. Plop, plop. Josephine set a pot under the leak and gently pulled an old blanket higher over Ethan's small frame. He stirred, half asleep, and murmured, "Mom, do you think we'll ever have a home of our own?" She froze. Such a simple, innocent question, and yet it cut like a knife. "Someday we will, sweetheart," she replied, her voice as soft as the wind. "I promise." Ethan smiled faintly, then drifted back to sleep. Josephine watched him for a long while. The dim light caught the sharp lines of her thin face, the calluses on her hands, and the dark eyes that held something strange, a light that was both fierce and aching. At 2 a.m., she stood, pulled on her coat, and stepped into the freezing night. She walked briskly to the next cleaning shift at a small hotel a few blocks away. In her pocket, she carried an unpaid bill and a tiny photo of Ethan, worn and creased, but the only thing that gave her the strength to keep going. Years later, whenever it rained, Josephine still remembered the sound of those drops, plop, plop. To her, it was like the beating of her heart, like the quiet vow of a mother. No matter how stormy life became, she would always be the roof over her child's head. Time slipped by like water through fingers. Ethan grew up, while Josephine aged before her time. In those years, she lived like a machine, waiting tables by day, cleaning an office building downtown by night. Every midnight, she would rub her swollen feet, take a sip of cold water, and get back to scrubbing the floors. No one knew. The tiny woman only slept 3 hours a day. No one saw how her hands cracked and bled from cleaning chemicals. And no one knew that every dollar she earned was carefully tucked into an envelope marked Ethan's college fund. Each morning, as Ethan got ready for school, Josephine hid the pain in her shoulders and back. She feared he'd worry if he saw. But more than that, she feared something else, that Ethan might feel ashamed of having a mother who worked as a janitor. One afternoon, on her way home, Josephine happened to see Ethan outside his school with a group of friends. She raised her hand slightly, about to call out to him, but just then Ethan turned away, pretending not to notice. The 16-year-old, dressed in a brand new jacket and sneakers she'd spent a month saving up for, walked past his mother as if she were a stranger. Josephine stood frozen. A cold winter gust swept past, carrying with it the sting of exhaust fumes and the salty taste at the corner of her mouth. She didn't blame him. She simply pulled her scarf up to cover her face, turned away, and whispered to herself, "He's young. He's embarrassed because we're poor. Someday he'll understand." That night, at home, Josephine opened the wooden box where she kept Ethan's savings. It wasn't much, but every bill was soaked in her sweat. She looked at the money and smiled. She believed as long as Ethan succeeded, every hardship was worth it. In the quiet of the small room, she wrote in her worn-out journal, "Ethan will have a different life. He'll walk a path of light one I was never allowed to take." The yellow lamplight fell across the page, catching on the slanted letters, blurred where her tears had fallen. The day Ethan received his college acceptance letter, Josephine cried like a child. She held him tightly, tears streaming onto the paper that read, "Congratulations." It was the moment she truly believed all her sacrifices had finally been repaid. "You did so well, Ethan. I'm so proud of you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Ethan smiled faintly, kissed her cheek, then gently pulled the letter back. In his eyes, the fire of youth and ambition flickered, but behind it, there was something else, something distant and cold. In the days that followed, Josephine busied herself packing for him. She sewed buttons, washed every piece of clothing, folded everything neatly into an old suitcase. The night before Ethan left, she sat by his bed all night, watching his sleeping face. She remembered when he was little, how he would cry and cling to her whenever he was sick. Now, this young man was about to leave her arms, and he didn't seem to care how empty it would leave her. When the bus pulled away, Josephine stood on the roadside, waving until it became no more than a dot on the highway. In that moment, she didn't yet realize that it wasn't just Ethan who was leaving. It was the bond between them, slowly starting to unravel. In the first few months of college, Josephine called him every week. At first, Ethan picked up, told her about classes, friends, laughed like he used to, but over time, the calls grew shorter, then colder, then fewer. "Mom, I'm busy. Mom, I've got a group project. I'll call you later." And eventually, the phone just rang and rang. Josephine didn't blame him. She simply sat quietly in the kitchen, listening to the wind slipping through the cracks in the door. She told herself maybe he was doing well, and that was all that mattered. But at night, as she stared at the empty chair across the table, her heart felt like a room with no windows, cold and dark. That Lunar New Year, Ethan didn't come home. He said he had to work at the campus library. Josephine smiled as she listened on the phone, doing her best to sound cheerful. But after she hung up, she sat in silence beside a half-burned candle. The little flame trembled just like her faith still burning, but fading fast. Ethan's graduation took place on a bright, sunny morning. Josephine sat in the back row, wearing the simplest dress she owned, a faded blue one she had carefully washed the night before. In her hands was a small bouquet of yellow daisies, picked fresh from her garden. When Ethan stepped onto the stage to receive his diploma, Josephine felt her heart swell with pride. She almost stood to wave, but just then, a young woman in a pristine white dress, elegant and poised, walked up and embraced Ethan. They smiled at each other, a tender, intimate smile that made everything around Josephine blur. People said her name was Claire, daughter of a prominent businessman. Her smile was gentle, but in Josephine's eyes there was something unsettling, a glance that measured, judged, as if quietly calculating the worth of everyone around her. After the ceremony, Ethan introduced her. "Mom, this is Claire, my girlfriend." Josephine smiled and offered her hand, but Claire barely grasped it and murmured, "Nice to meet you." Her voice was soft, but cold. Ethan didn't notice. He was too busy talking about his future, about a job at Claire's family's finance firm, about the luxury apartment they were renting together. In every word, Josephine could feel it. Her son was drifting not just physically, but emotionally. A few months later, they got married. The wedding was held at a 5-star hotel, grand, glittering, excessive. Josephine was seated at a table in the back, alongside the household staff and a few of Claire's old acquaintances. Everyone was dressed in designer clothes, speaking a polished language she didn't understand. When Ethan emerged in a sleek black tuxedo beside his bride, Josephine barely recognized him. His eyes had changed, confident, distant, cold. She wanted to rush up, hug him, tell him how proud she was. But Claire's gaze brushed over her, sharp and icy, and Josephine froze in place. That night, after the reception, Josephine returned to her little house in the suburbs. She slipped off her shoes and sat quietly by the door. She opened the envelope containing her wedding gift, a small, modest sum, then folded it up again. She wasn't sad about being poor. She just felt like someone standing outside a brightly lit window, looking in on a world that no longer had room for her. After Ethan's wedding, Josephine's house felt emptier than ever. Meals were now for one. Family photos gathered a thin layer of dust. The TV stayed on, not for entertainment, but to fill the silence. Each morning, she still made 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with milk out of habit. Then she would stare at the second cup, sigh, and pour it down the sink. Ethan still visited from time to time, but never stayed long. He always came with Claire, bringing the scent of expensive perfume and an air of rushed politeness. "Mom, why don't you hire someone to clean this place? I can send someone over." "No need," Josephine replied. "I can still manage." Claire offered a soft smile, but beneath it was a carefully wrapped condescension. "Ethan's just worried about you. You really don't have to push yourself." Each time they left, the house felt colder. Josephine slowly realized that the son she had raised with love and tears now saw her as something outdated, something to be put aside for the sake of tidiness. One rainy afternoon, Josephine opened the old safe in her study. Its paint chipped and hinges stiff. It held the things most important to her: a few pieces of cheap jewelry, a worn-out journal, and a folder of documents. Quietly, she added one more, a handwritten will, shaky but firm. In it, Josephine left the house not to Ethan, but to his daughter, her granddaughter. The only one who still called her Grandma Jo in that sweet, innocent voice each time she visited. She knew Ethan would be angry, but her heart was steady. Some things couldn't be measured in money. Kindness, connection, memory. And that's why Josephine kept one last secret, a thick envelope hidden behind the final wooden panel of the safe. Inside was no money, but a copy of an old birth certificate, yellowed, fragile. And on it, the name of Ethan's father was not the man in their family photo. Josephine sat for a long while, fingertips brushing the paper, her eyes heavy. "You don't need to know this. Not ever." She closed the safe. The soft click echoed through the still room. What she didn't know was that, years later, that very sound, the closing of a safe, would mark the beginning of a night when every secret would finally come undone. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the heavy curtains, flooding the house with brightness. But to Josephine, that light brought no warmth, only a cruel reminder that the night before hadn't been a dream. She sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in front of her. Its bitter, sharp scent hung in the air, mirroring the weight inside her chest. Everything in the house was just as it had been, and yet she wasn't. She was no longer the mother who simply endured in silence. She was now a woman who had watched the son she loved betray her, without a single word. Footsteps echoed from the stairs. Ethan. He entered wearing a sharp suit, hair neatly combed, face fresh and composed as if nothing had happened. "Good morning, Mom." Josephine looked up at him, her gaze lingering for a long time. Her voice was calm, but low and measured. "You got home late last night." Ethan paused, just a beat too long. His eyes flicked briefly toward the study. The safe door was shut. A flash of tension crossed his face, but he quickly recovered. "Yeah, had some urgent work to handle. Didn't want to wake you." "Is that so?" Josephine asked, her tone thin as thread. "Yes," he replied, pouring himself a glass of water. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on his phone, distracted and distant. Josephine studied her son, the lines of his face, the way he moved. Everything about him felt unfamiliar. This man wasn't the boy who used to run through the house shouting, "Mommy." His eyes now held something else: coldness, calculation, and the weary strain of a man burdened by debts his mother didn't know about. She wanted to ask him outright, "What were you doing in my study?" But her throat closed. She wasn't afraid of the answer, she was afraid it might confirm what she already knew. Ethan finished his water and glanced at his watch. "I've got a meeting. Claire and I will be over this weekend. We need to discuss something. Please be ready." And just like that, he was gone, leaving behind the faint trace of cologne in the air. Josephine sat motionless, staring at the closed door. The emptiness inside her pressed down on her chest, heavy as stone. She whispered to herself, voice trembling, "My son, did I lose you a long time ago, and just didn't see it?" That afternoon, dark clouds rolled in, and the wind howled through the window frame. Josephine sat in the living room, waiting. The teapot on the table still steamed, but the cup next to it remained empty, saved for Ethan. She knew he'd be back today, just as he'd said, and she also knew she could no longer stay silent. A car pulled up outside. The front door opened. Ethan walked in, shirt neatly buttoned, face bright, the picture of a successful man. Claire followed behind him, her perfume subtly trailing in the air. "Hi, Mom," Ethan greeted, flashing a polite smile. "Come in," Josephine replied softly. "We need to talk." Claire took a seat, crossing her legs, her eyes sweeping the worn furniture. She offered a faint smile. "This house has a sort of vintage charm, doesn't it?" Josephine didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on Ethan. "That night, what were you doing in my study?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ethan paused, a flicker of panic in his eyes, then quickly masked it with composure. He smiled faintly, keeping his voice even. "I just needed to grab a few documents. Nothing serious, Mom." "What documents?" Josephine asked again, her voice low, every word like the edge of a blade. "Some financial files. For work," Ethan said, casually. Claire chimed in, her tone sweet but firm. "We actually meant to talk to you sooner, but the timing never worked out. Ethan's expanding his business, and this house could really help." Josephine blinked, trying to follow. "Help? What do you mean by that?" Ethan looked at her, and for the first time his tone hardened. "We want to use this house as collateral, Mom. Just temporarily. I'll handle everything, you don't have to worry." The words dropped like a verdict. Josephine stared at her son in stunned silence, then she let out a dry, brittle laugh. "Collateral? The house your father and I spent our whole lives trying to hold on to?" "Mom, don't make this more dramatic than it needs to be," Ethan snapped, his voice edged with frustration. "We just need some working capital. A few months tops. You know how tough the market is." "And what if you can't pay it back?" Josephine asked, her voice trembling, her eyes welling with tears. You don't trust me? Ethan pressed, jaw tight. I trusted the boy you used to be, she said, breath quickening. But the man standing in front of me now, I don't even recognize. Claire sighed and glanced at Ethan. Ethan, calm down. Maybe she just doesn't understand the full picture. Josephine turned to Claire, meeting her gaze dead on. Oh, I understand more than you think. I understand when someone's trying to take the last thing I have left. The air thickened. Ethan stood, voice now cold and flat. Mom, I don't want to argue. You should rest. We'll take care of the details. The door closed behind them. Josephine collapsed into the chair, hands limp in her lap. Outside, the rain pounded the porch relentless, icy, and for the first time, she saw it clearly. Her son wasn't just distant. He was becoming someone she might one day have to defend herself from. A week after the confrontation, whispers began to ripple through the small neighborhood where Josephine lived. Rumors spread like wildfire. People said Ethan was in serious trouble with his business, that he had used his mother's house as collateral to cover debts, that the two had had a massive falling out. At first, Josephine tried to ignore it. She still went to the market every Tuesday morning, still greeted the neighbors with a tired smile. But over time, she began to feel the change in their eyes, probing, pitying, and worse, judgmental. Poor woman, someone murmured as she passed. Her son's so successful, yet he lets her live in that run-down old place. Heard the bank's about to seize the house. Josephine quickened her pace, but the words clung to her back like needles pricking her skin. When she got home, she shut the door, leaned against the wall, and listened to her own heart pounding wildly. In the quiet of the house, the noise from the world outside made her feel smaller and completely alone. That afternoon, she went to the garden, intending to water the yellow daisies, the ones Ethan had planted as a child. But when the cap on the watering can flew off and water splashed everywhere, she no longer had the strength to bend down and pick it up. Everything felt like it was slipping from her grasp. That evening, Josephine called Ethan. The phone rang for a long time before his voice finally came through, dry and clipped. Mom, I'm in a meeting. Can we talk tomorrow? Just 1 minute, Ethan. I heard. People are saying you're in trouble. Is it true? Who's saying that? They don't know anything. Don't worry, Mom. Can you swear to me that it's not true? Silence. Mom, don't make me explain everything. I know what I'm doing. Click. Josephine sat still. In that silence, she realized something heartbreaking. Her son had learned to lie effortlessly. And the worst part was, he wasn't lying to spare her feelings. He was lying to keep her out of his way. The next day, she ran into Mrs. Thompson, an old neighbor, at the gate. The woman smiled politely, but there was a glint of mockery in her voice. So I heard Ethan's planning to sell the house for some big investment. You must be proud. Josephine simply replied, Yes, my son is very ambitious. Then turned away, hiding the shine in her eyes. That night, Josephine sat alone before the old safe, her hand resting on its cold metal door. She whispered, Ethan, what exactly are you trading away? Outside, the rain began to fall. Again. Rain just like every other time in her life when something terrible was about to happen. That morning, Josephine woke earlier than usual. She didn't know why, only that her heart was pounding, her chest tight with the uneasy weight of intuition. Faint light slipped through the curtains, casting a dim glow over the safe in the corner of the room. She stared at it for a long time, a strange unease crawling under her skin, as if the object itself were staring back at her. Slowly, Josephine approached and turned the dial. The soft clicks of the lock echoed in the stillness. When the door creaked open, she immediately scanned the contents, the folders, the envelopes she'd always kept so carefully. But something was missing. The cream-colored folder, wrapped in plastic, the one holding her handwritten will, and the deed to the house, was gone. She froze. Her hand trembled uncontrollably. She searched every shelf, every stack of paper, flipped through everything, hoping she had misplaced it. Nothing. Cold sweat broke across her forehead. No, this can't be, she whispered. She remembered exactly where she had placed it just before her birthday. No one else knew the safe's combination, except Ethan. He had helped her reset it years ago. Josephine stood still, the ground beneath her seeming to collapse. Her mind flashed back to that night, the yellow lamplight, Ethan crouched in front of the safe, the final click. It all made sense now. She sank into a chair, gasping. Her whole body felt drained. Those documents weren't just about ownership. They were her life's work, her husband's final promise, the symbol of all the trust she had placed in her only son. The door creaked open.
Ethan walked in just as she sat frozen in the chair. "Mom, what's wrong?" Josephine looked up, her eyes red and glassy. "What did you do with the papers from my safe?" "What papers?" Ethan asked, voice flat, disturbingly calm. "Don't pretend. The will, the deed, everything's gone." He paused, then exhaled and replied with practiced composure. "Mom, I just took them to get them sorted out. No big deal. Everything was messy. I thought I'd help organize it." "You had no right," Josephine said, voice tight and cracking. Tears welled up, threatening to spill. "That was mine. I trusted you like a fool." Ethan's voice suddenly rose. "I'm doing this for you. You think I wanted this? I'm just trying to keep everything from falling apart." "Falling apart?" Josephine let out a bitter laugh. "And your solution is to steal what little I have left?" Silence. He didn't argue. The quiet stretched, sharp and suffocating.
Then Ethan turned away, speaking under his breath. "I'll return them. But you need to understand I'm trying to save everything. If you keep resisting, it's all going to collapse." He left the room, the door swinging gently behind him, half shut. Josephine remained seated, her frail shoulders shaking. She reached out and touched the empty space inside the safe, the spot where those precious documents had once been, cold, hollow, merciless. In that moment, she knew. The thread that once tied mother and son together had finally snapped, and some things, once broken, can never be made whole again. 3 days later, on a gray, overcast morning, a sharp knock echoed through the house just as Josephine was making tea. The knocking was urgent, cold, startling her enough to drop the spoon. She wiped her hands on her apron and made her way to the door. Standing on the porch was a young man in a black suit, holding a thick folder, wearing a polite, impersonal smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Josephine. I'm with Central Trust Bank. I'm here to discuss the mortgage on this property." The words hit her like a bolt of lightning. "Mortgage," Josephine repeated, her voice hoarse. "I've never mortgaged my house." The man looked momentarily unsure, then spoke more carefully. "According to our records, the contract was signed 2 weeks ago. The listed co-owners are yourself and your son, Mr. Ethan. All documents are in order, including signatures." Josephine's face went pale. Her hands trembled so badly she had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. "Let me see the file." He handed her the folder. Josephine glanced down Ethan's handwriting, unmistakable, and next to it, her signature. But she knew she had never signed those papers. This isn't my signature," she said, her voice cracking. "My son, he forged it." The man sighed, still polite but utterly detached. "I'm only authorized to provide information, ma'am. If you wish to dispute the documents, you'll need to speak with our legal department. However, the loan has already been disbursed. If payment is not made in full within 3 months, the property will be subject to foreclosure." She watched him walk away, the folder shaking in her hands. The world around her fell silent. Even the ticking of the wall clock seemed to stop. Josephine sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. The tears came silently, pouring out from somewhere deep inside, and only one thought rang in her mind. Ethan took my home. That afternoon, Ethan returned. The moment he stepped in, he began, "Mom, I can explain." "No need." Josephine cut him off, her voice steel cold. "You used my house, you forged my signature, and you still call that saving everything?" Ethan said nothing. His face was tense, lips pressed into a hard line. "I had no choice, Mom. My company is collapsing. Without capital, I lose everything." "I swear it's just a few months, I'll pay it all back." "You say you lose everything. What about me?" Josephine stood, her eyes blazing. "This house is everything to me. It holds your father's love, our memories, our life, and you stole it with one forged signature." Ethan clenched his fists, his voice tight, trying to stay calm. "I did it for the family." "What family, Ethan?" she screamed. "The one you use as an excuse for your greed?" The air grew thick. Ethan stepped back, his eyes darting away. Then, without another word, he turned and slammed the door behind him. Josephine collapsed into the chair. Her heart felt crushed, strangled by betrayal. The house around her suddenly felt unfamiliar, like it had already stopped being hers a long time ago. That night, Josephine didn't sleep. She sat in the living room, the yellow lamp casting a dim glow across her hollowed face. In front of her lay the bank documents, now smudged with fingerprints and tear stains. Every line, every number carved deeper into her chest like silent, deliberate cuts. Outside, the rain fell heavy. It mingled with the sound of wind brushing against old window panes, a mournful lullaby. She thought of little Ethan, the boy who once ran barefoot across the floor, clutching a piece of bread, laughing. "Mommy, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big castle." Now he hadn't just taken her small home. He had taken the last piece of her trust. Josephine clenched the papers in her fist, then stood. A thought struck her with startling clarity. She had to know the truth. She couldn't survive on promises anymore. She couldn't be the blind, forgiving mother any longer. The next morning, Josephine made her way to the office where Ethan supposedly worked, a tall glass tower, sleek and sterile. She entered, swallowed by a sea of well-dressed young professionals, each one wearing the same polished smile. The receptionist looked up. "Hello, may I help you?" "I'm looking for Ethan. Ethan Johnson, my son." The woman paused, then answered gently, as if it were routine. "I'm sorry. Mr. Johnson no longer works here." "No longer?" "He left about 3 months ago. Financial issues, I believe. I'm sure you understand." Josephine stood frozen. Her heart stopped. 3 months. That meant before the forged signature, before the mortgage, everything had been a lie. She left the building, not remembering how she made it outside. A bitter wind stung her cheeks. A crumpled flyer caught in the breeze danced around her feet. The world spun. That evening, when Ethan returned, Josephine was waiting. "You lied to me," she said quietly. "Mom, don't make this dramatic. You were fired. I know everything." Ethan froze. His face paled, then hardened into anger. "Who told you? You're spying on me now?" "I'm taking back the honesty you stole from me," she shouted, her voice breaking. Ethan stepped forward, trying to hold his temper. "You don't understand, Mom. You have no idea the pressure I'm under. Claire, she can't handle me failing. I just wanted to show her I was worth something." Josephine stepped back. "So to prove yourself to your wife, you were willing to betray your own mother?" "Stop it!" Ethan yelled, his eyes wild and red. "Don't act like you're perfect. You've spent your whole life clinging to this house like it's sacred, living in the past like someone already dead. You have nothing left for me to admire." The words hit her like a blade. Josephine staggered, breath caught in her throat. Ethan turned and stormed upstairs. She stood there, hands trembling, tears pouring down her face. Outside, the rain beat against the window like someone weeping alongside her. And in that moment, Josephine understood. What had broken today wasn't just a home. It was the most sacred bond a mother could ever hold. After that night, Josephine's house fell into a heavy, unspoken silence. Ethan still came and went, but there were no more words exchanged. Each morning she heard the sound of his car pulling away. Each evening, the door slammed shut with a dry finality. Between them stretched an invisible space, long, cold, and impossible to cross. Josephine still cooked, still set 2 bowls at the table, one for herself, one for her son. But the second bowl always grew cold, untouched. Some nights, she would set down her chopsticks and listen to the faint clink of the spoon against porcelain, a small sound that stung like the snap of an over-tightened string. Occasionally, she heard Ethan's voice from the study, low, harsh, strained during phone calls. "I told you I need more time." "Stop calling me, I'm handling it." The fragmented conversations deepened her unease. One morning, Josephine saw Claire in the yard, phone in hand, face drawn tight with tension. "We can't let this blow up, Ethan," Claire whispered, her voice sharp with panic. When she noticed Josephine watching, she quickly forced a smile. "Good morning, I was just talking to a friend." Josephine nodded, but the suspicion had already taken root. She felt it something darker was hiding beneath the surface. It wasn't just about money. There was something else, something buried deeper. That night, when Ethan came home late, Josephine was waiting for him in the living room. The desk lamp cast a pale glow over her gaunt face, but her eyes shone with an odd clarity, the kind that comes when someone has already braced themselves for pain. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I don't want to lose you, but if you keep shutting me out, we will lose each other for good." Ethan stood still, staring at her. For a second, something flickered in his eyes. Hesitation, maybe even guilt, but it was quickly smothered by his usual cold composure. "Mom, everything's under control." "Don't worry." He turned away. Josephine simply nodded. Silent tears rolled down her cheeks, but she said no more. There was no need, because deep down, she already knew the real storm hadn't come yet. Not truly. Late that night, she opened the secret compartment in the safe. Inside lay the dust-covered USB, the one containing a recording left behind by her late husband. Josephine stared at it for a long time, as if some unseen hand was guiding her. Then, softly, she whispered, "Maybe it's time you learned the truth, Ethan." That afternoon, the sky hung heavy and gray. Clouds gathered thick above the old house, casting a dim, suffocating shadow. Josephine sat in the living room, hands clasped tightly together, eyes fixed on the door. She had made up her mind today she would not let Ethan leave without telling the truth. The door opened. Ethan stepped in, looking exhausted, his shirt wrinkled, tie loose, face drawn and hollow. Dark circles framed his eyes. It was clear the past few days hadn't been kind to him either. "Mom, I don't have much time," he said, his voice rough. "I have a meeting at 6. Josephine rose slowly. "With who, Ethan?" "Business partners. Don't worry, Mom. I'm handling—" "Stop lying." Her voice wasn't loud, but it struck like a hammer. Ethan froze. Josephine stepped forward and laid the bank documents on the table between them. "Is this how you're handling it? By mortgaging the house, forging my signature, and pretending everything's fine?" Ethan's fists clenched. "I didn't have a choice. You don't understand, you never have." "Understand what, Ethan?" Josephine's tone trembled, but held sharpness. "Understand that my son stole his mother's trust? That he turned her home into a number on a contract? You think it's easy to live the way you do?" he snapped, voice rising. You don't know what it's like to be looked down on, to be nobody.
Claire, my job, my future, if I lose my money, I lose everything. Josephine took a step back. His words cut deeper than he could ever know. So that's it? You did all this? Because you're afraid of being abandoned? Ethan's breath hitched, but he said nothing. She looked at him, voice breaking. Son, I worked 30 years, endured humiliation, sleepless nights, aching bones, all so you'd never have to bow to anyone. And now you bow to money. Ethan raked his hands through his hair, pacing, then slammed his palm against the table. You don't get it. If I fail, Claire leaves. I lose everything. I had to do it. Josephine's eyes glistened, but there was a strange clarity in them, pain sharpened into understanding. And what happens if you lose me, Ethan? The room went silent. The clock ticked slow, hollow, like the heartbeat of something dying. Ethan looked away, his lips pressed tight. You don't understand, he muttered again, softer this time, the defiance in his voice faltering. You never have. Josephine stepped forward, her trembling hand reaching for his cheek, but he pulled away. Her hand dropped, lifeless, to her side. Maybe you're right, she whispered. Maybe I don't understand how love can turn into selfishness so easily. Ethan turned his face into the shadows, refusing to meet her gaze. Josephine looked at him, her frail shoulders shaking, her tears falling in silence. Ethan, her voice cracked, breaking apart like thin glass. Have I truly lost you? For good? The room was utterly still. Late afternoon light spilled through the window, casting fragmented beams across Josephine's worn face. She sat down across from her son, her voice low but steady. Ethan, I don't want more excuses. I want the truth. All of it. Ethan stood frozen, shoulders trembling slightly. His eyes flickered between anger, shame, and something deeper despair. Finally, he exhaled, each word leaving him like it was being dragged out of his chest. My company. It's gone, Mom. Josephine said nothing. She simply listened. Claire and her father invested the capital. I was just managing it. But I made a mistake. I bet everything on a risky deal and lost. I tried borrowing more, juggling debts, buying time. But it all spiraled out of control. He dropped into the chair behind him, burying his face in his hands. I have nothing left, Mom. No money, no backup. Claire. She said if I couldn't turn things around, she'd leave. She told me she couldn't live with a failure. Josephine stared at her son, this grown man before her, once the little boy she'd taught to write, to read, to understand honesty, now trembling, not from guilt, but from fear of being unloved. So you used my house? She asked, slowly, each word landing like stone. I didn't mean to forge your signature. Claire said if we just moved quickly, she could handle the paperwork, that all we needed was your agreement. He looked up, eyes pleading. I thought I could fix everything before you ever found out. But it all fell apart. Now you know. And I have nothing left to hide. Josephine rose and walked toward the window. Outside, the sun had dipped low, shadows stretching across the floor like echoes of everything that had passed. Ethan, she said, her voice raw. I spent my whole life keeping this house not for its worth, but because it was the last piece of your father I had. The last piece of the boy you once were. I know, he whispered. No, you don't. Her voice cracked, sharp with sorrow. If you did, you would never have used it like a bargaining chip. You wouldn't let a woman drag you to the edge just to prove your worth. Ethan didn't speak. His fingers clenched, knuckles white. A single tear slipped down his cheek. I'm sorry, Mom. I was wrong. I wanted you to believe I was good enough, that I meant something. Josephine turned to him.
A fragile, trembling smile surfaced through her tears. "You were enough, Ethan, long before money ever entered the picture. But you're the one who threw that away, not me, not Claire." Ethan lowered his head. The silence returned heavy, still. Josephine walked over, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You can still fix this. Not with money, but with truth. If you still love your mother, start there. Speak honestly. Tell me everything, even the part you're afraid to say." Ethan slowly looked up, his eyes rimmed red. "Mom, there's something else I haven't told you." His voice cracked, barely more than a whisper, caught somewhere between confession and collapse. Josephine looked at her son, waiting. The window light stretched shadows across Ethan's face, casting jagged lines that made him look older, more broken. He bowed his head, hands clenched, and when he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Mom, Claire didn't just ask for money to invest. She also forced me to cover her father's debts." Josephine's brow furrowed. "What debts?" "They were under my name, but they weren't really mine." The room seemed to stop breathing. Ethan continued, his voice shaking, every word a confession carved from guilt. "I loved her, Mom. I trusted her completely. When her father's company started falling apart, they said all they needed was for me to sign on a few short-term loans, just to buy time. They promised to handle everything. I thought I was doing the right thing, protecting the woman I loved." He let out a bitter laugh, tears dropping into his palms. "But they didn't pay. They vanished. Claire left. She walked out of the house, blocked my number. Her father filed for bankruptcy, and I was left with everything." Josephine was frozen. She couldn't even feel her own breath. "So, you used my house to save them?" Ethan nodded, slowly, ashamed. "I had nothing else. I thought if I paid it off, she'd come back. I know I was stupid, but Mom, I couldn't bear her leaving me. I've lost everything, my reputation, my career, and now maybe even you." That last sentence broke into a sob. Josephine stood still, tears running silently down her cheeks. And in that moment, she couldn't tell which hurt more, that her son had been so deeply deceived, or that he had been willing to trade everything to keep someone so unworthy. She stepped forward, placed her hands firmly on Ethan's shoulders, and forced him to meet her gaze. "Ethan, do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just risk this house, you lost yourself. You turned your mother into a stranger in your life. For love, you knelt before someone who left you, and stepped over the one who gave you life." Ethan broke down, resting his head against her chest, sobbing. But Josephine gently pushed him away, her body trembling. "I don't blame you for loving, son. I blame you for letting that love become shame." Silence fell. Only the ticking clock and their uneven breaths filled the space. Ethan whispered through tears, "Mom, I don't know what to do anymore." Josephine looked at him, her eyes red, but her voice suddenly calm. "You've already done the worst, Ethan. There's only one thing left you can do now. Stop lying to me." He looked up, startled, as if shocked that she still spoke to him with that voice, the voice of love, however wounded. "I'm sorry, Mom," he murmured. I'll make it right. I'll give it all back." But Josephine shook her head slowly. "No, Ethan. Some things, once lost, can't be bought back with money." The lights flickered as the season's first rain began to fall. Josephine stepped back toward the window, staring into the storm, her chest hollow. She knew, even as her son knelt in front of her, that the distance between them now, between a mother who had loved blindly and a son consumed by his ambition, had grown into something vast, a chasm, and maybe impossible to cross. Outside, the rain poured down in torrents. The wind lashed against the window frame, shaking the curtains violently. Josephine stood with her back to Ethan, her eyes fixed on the storm-gray sky. Her tears had stopped falling. They had dried the moment the truth broke her heart. "Mom," Ethan called softly, his voice trembling. Josephine didn't turn. "Mom, please say something. I'm sorry. I'll fix everything. I swear." No answer. Only the sound of rain pounding on the roof, heavy, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of someone fading away. "Mom, I'll get the house back. I'll start over. Just give me one more chance." He stepped closer, reaching out to touch her shoulder, but the moment his hand brushed her, Josephine turned. Her face was pale, lips trembling. "One more chance?" Her voice was soft, but sharp as a blade. "Ethan, you had a lifetime of chances, and you threw them all away. You didn't just lose a house, you lost my trust. Do you understand that?" Ethan bit his lip, tears rising. "Mom, please don't say that. I just wanted you to be proud of me." Josephine looked at him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, disappointment, and a love so deep it hurt to carry. "I was proud of you every day, Ethan. But today, I don't even recognize you anymore." She turned to walk away, but suddenly clutched her chest. A sharp pain burst through her ribs, spreading fast across her body. Her breath came in short, broken gasps, her face drained of color. "Mom!" Ethan cried, lunging forward to catch her. Josephine struggled to speak, her words fractured by pain. "Don't touch me. Just go." "No. Mom, I'm sorry. It's my fault. Please, listen to me," Ethan shouted, his voice breaking into panic. She tried to speak again, but no sound came, only the faint movement of her lips. Her vision blurred. The room spun. The pain clamped around her chest until she fell forward. Ethan caught her, trembling violently. "Mom! Mom! It's me! Please don't leave me! I'm sorry! I'm so sorry!" A thunderclap roared above the house. Josephine's body slumped sideways in his arms, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. Ethan sobbed, truly sobbed for the first time since he was a child. He pressed his face to her chest, his cries mixing with the drumming rain. "Please, Mom, please don't leave me. I have no one else. Please." Josephine's eyelids fluttered open for a moment. A single tear slid from the corner of her eye. "My son, I've always been here," she whispered faintly, and her hand slipped from his grasp. Ethan screamed a raw, broken sound that tore through the quiet house. Outside, thunder rumbled endlessly, and the rain crashed down harder. Inside, beneath the dim, flickering light, two figures remained, one still, one kneeling, surrounded by the storm. There, in that fragile silence between life and loss, a mother's love shattered, betrayed, and yet somehow redeemed, lingered in the echo of her final words. 4 days passed. The hospital room was stark white, thick with the sterile scent of disinfectant. Josephine opened her eyes, wincing as the light stabbed through them. Everything was blurry except for the steady beep, beep, of the heart monitor beside her. As her vision cleared, she saw a figure slumped at the side of the bed, Ethan. He sat hunched over, eyes sunken, his face gaunt and pale, covered with rough stubble. His wrinkled shirt was misbuttoned, his entire body carrying the weight of someone who had aged years in just days. Josephine stirred slightly. Ethan jerked upright, his eyes red and glassy. "Mom, you're awake." His voice trembled, caught in his throat. He grasped her hand, cold, frail, nearly weightless in his palm. "I'm sorry, Mom. I've been here the whole time. I haven't left. Please don't be mad at me anymore. Please." Josephine looked at him, her gaze heavy. After a long pause, she gave a faint nod. "Did you call the doctor?" I did. They said you're stable. You just need to rest. No more stress. She looked up at the ceiling, her eyes cloudy. The heart attack had passed, but inside, her heart still ached, not from illness, but from everything she had lost. After a long silence, she asked softly, "And the house?" Ethan lowered his head. His voice was a whisper. "The bank still has the documents, but I spoke to them. I'll work. I'll pay it back. I swear." Josephine smiled faintly, a tired, sorrowful smile. "You always swear that." Ethan clung to her hand, like a child grasping his mother's sleeve in a nightmare. "Not this time. I'm not lying anymore. Please, believe me." She didn't respond. Her eyes drifted to the window, where late sunlight spilled onto the tiled floor, pale, soft, fleeting. After Ethan left, the doctor came in, asked a few questions, then stepped out. A young nurse followed, changing the IV bag, smiling kindly. She placed a small silver USB on the table. "Your son asked me to return this. Said he found it at home. Might be yours." Josephine's eyes fell on the flash drive. The light caught its metallic surface, making her flinch. She knew it immediately, the old USB from her safe, the one that held the only recording of her late husband's voice. She picked it up with trembling fingers. Somewhere deep within, a feeling surged, a sense that fate was demanding she open it, even if it meant unraveling whatever fragile piece she had left. She closed her eyes, tears slipped down her cheeks. "George, I've never dared to hear your voice again. But maybe now it's time." The golden light of the late afternoon spilled across her thin face, while the USB sat silently on the table beside her, a secret waiting to be reborn. Night fell like a sheer veil, quiet and soft. In the hospital room, only the warm yellow light above the bed remained. Josephine lay still. On the table beside her, the small USB glinted faintly, reflecting the glow like a drop of cold metal. She reached out and plugged it into the laptop. Click. A small sound, yet it sent her heart racing. The screen lit up with a single file. "To my dear Joe." Her hand trembled as she moved the cursor and clicked. A soft static. Then a man's voice. Warm, deep, familiar. The voice she thought she'd lost forever. "Joe. If you're hearing this, it means I'm already gone." Josephine closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek. George's voice filled the room, steady, calm like the breath of a memory. "I know you're strong. But there's something I've been afraid to tell you all my life." She stopped breathing. The room fell into a silence so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. "Ethan, he's not your biological son, Joe." Time collapsed. Her pulse plummeted, her breath caught in her throat. She sat frozen, unable to process the weight of the words. "Back then, when you lost the baby at 3 months, I was terrified you wouldn't survive it. I was afraid it would break you. Around that time, my sister Mary died in an accident. She left behind a newborn. No one knew, not even you. Just me and the lawyer. I filed for adoption. Made you the legal mother. I just wanted to save you, Joe. I wanted you to have a reason to keep living." Josephine trembled, her hand pressed to her chest. Her breathing was shallow, the voice in her ears like a hammer tapping against the cracks in her heart. "Ethan is family, my blood, not yours. I thought I would tell you when he was older, but I couldn't. I was afraid you'd leave, afraid I'd ruin our family." Josephine broke. Tears came not in sobs, but in strangled gasps. Her body shook from the inside out. "I know. If one day you learn the truth, you might hate me. But I believe the love you gave Ethan didn't come from blood. It came from your heart. You're his mother, Joe, in every way that matters. Through every sacrifice, every tear, every sleepless night. You are his mother." The recording stopped. Silence swallowed the room again. Josephine sat motionless, eyes fixed on the black screen. Dizziness surged, and she clutched the edge of the bed to steady herself. Not her biological son. The words echoed like thunder, heavy as stone. Every memory, Ethan's first steps, his first mommy, the dinners, the nights she stitched his shirts by hand, now hovered in the air, fragile and trembling. Were they still real? She gripped the blanket, her lips quivering. "Oh God, Ethan." A new kind of pain washed over her, deeper than betrayal, sharper than loss. Not because something had been taken from her, but because her entire life might have been built on a beautiful lie. She looked at the USB again, eyes blurred with tears, and whispered, "George, did you save me? Or destroy me?" Outside, wind howled. The curtains swayed. Thunder rumbled in the distance, signaling another storm. But this time, it wasn't between mother and son. It was between truth and mercy. That afternoon, the sky was the color of ash. Josephine was discharged from the hospital and returned to the old house. Everything was just as it had been. The cracked leather chair, the family photo on the wall, the damp smell of wood in the air. But to her, the house felt different, no longer a place of cherished memories, but a box holding a lie that had lasted 70 years. She sat quietly by the window, the USB drive resting on the table, her heart heavy. Outside, she heard Ethan's car pulling into the driveway, the sound of footsteps, the click of a key turning in the lock. "Mom, I'm home." His voice was soft, tentative, as if afraid of shattering the fragile air between them. Josephine didn't turn around. She spoke slowly, deliberately. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you." He stopped, concern flashing in his eyes. "What is it, Mom?" "It's about you and your father." Ethan sat down across from her, his brows furrowing. Josephine placed the USB on the table, the metal catching the light and reflecting onto his face. "Do you remember your father left this for me?" "I do, but I thought it was just some old files." "No," Josephine shook her head gently. "It's a truth I never wanted to know and never wanted you to hear." She paused, took a deep breath, and looked him straight in the eyes. "Ethan, you're not my biological son." The silence exploded like a bomb. Ethan froze, his eyes wide, lips parted, but no words came. What did you say?" "Your father took you in from his sister. You're her child. I lost my own baby before you were born. Your father was afraid I wouldn't survive the grief, so he did everything he could to save me by giving me another child to love." Ethan shot to his feet. The chair toppled behind him with a loud thud. No, that can't be true." "It is," Josephine replied softly. "Your father left a recording. I've heard everything." Ethan backed away, hands trembling, his breath quickening. "So, all this time, my whole life was a lie? You're not my real mother?" Josephine wanted to move toward him, but she couldn't. She knew each step would feel like a blade to his chest. "I didn't give birth to you, Ethan, but I raised you. I loved you, like my own flesh and blood." "No!" Ethan cried, his voice cracking. "No, you don't understand. You're everything to me. You're the only person I have left in this world. Why would you say that? Why now?" Josephine choked up. Tears spilled, landing on her trembling hands. "Because you need to know, to understand that the love I have for you isn't out of duty or blood. It's because you're Ethan, the child who saved me from despair." Ethan trembled, his hands gripping his head, sobs tearing from his chest like something breaking apart. "No, Mom, I don't want to know this. I'd rather be the son who betrayed you than become a stranger to you." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Ethan sank to his knees, burying his head in her lap, his whole body shaking. Josephine stroked his hair, her voice unsteady. "My son, I'm sorry for letting you live in the shadow of a truth so cruel. But no matter what, I love you." "Do you hear me?" Ethan sobbed, his hands clutching hers tightly. "Mom, no matter who I am, no matter whose blood runs in me, you're still my mother. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." They held each other for a long time while a gentle rain fell outside the porch. No more arguments, no more blame, only the quiet breaths of two shattered hearts trying to warm each other again. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the window, pale and weary. The rain had stopped, but the air still clung with dampness. The house was unusually quiet, as if the sobs from the night before had never happened. Josephine sat in her armchair, a thin shawl draped over her shoulders. In her hands was a photograph Ethan at 8 years old, standing in a field of yellow chrysanthemums, beaming, holding up a wooden sign that read, "Mom's Little Hero." The door creaked open. Ethan stepped inside, a small suitcase in hand. The morning light fell across his face, gaunt, but with a strange calmness in his eyes. And Josephine looked up and managed a faint smile. "Are you going somewhere?" Ethan set the suitcase down, his voice hoarse. "I need to go away for a while, Mom. I have to figure things out. I can't stay in this house, not after everything I've done." Josephine gripped the armrests, trying to stay composed. "You don't have to go. I'm not angry anymore." "You're not angry, but I'm angry at myself." He gave a bitter smile. "I hurt you too much. If I stay, every time I look at you, all I'll see is guilt." Josephine leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Ethan, you don't owe me anything. You're still my son, no matter where you go." Ethan shook his head. "I owe you everything, Mom. But this time, I need to repay it. Not with words, but with actions. I want to start over. Not to prove anything, just so you can believe that I've truly grown." She looked at her son, her heart aching with both pain and pride. "How long will you be gone?" "I don't know." He took a deep breath. "But I promise when I have the strength, I'll come back, not as a son who was forgiven, but as a man worthy of your love." Josephine nodded gently. Tears welled in her eyes, but she tried to smile. "My son, I believe in you." Ethan knelt before her, kissed her frail hand. "Thank you, Mom, for loving a son you didn't give birth to." Josephine trembled, placing both hands on his cheeks. "I didn't give birth to you, but you are my breath, the reason I'm still alive today." Ethan pressed his lips together, tears rolling down his face. He stood up and turned away. At the doorway, he looked back one last time. "Mom, take care of yourself. When this house truly belongs to you again, I'll come home." Josephine nodded silently. The door closed softly, but its sound echoed through her like the flap of wings, leaving the nest a quiet but permanent parting. Outside, sunlight spilled over the yellow chrysanthemums, brilliant and fragile. Josephine sat still, watching the light filter in through the window, her lips moving in a silent prayer. "Be safe, my son. Whoever you are, wherever you go, I'll be waiting." Since the day Ethan left, the house had changed. No more footsteps on the stairs, no more doors opening and closing, no more scent of morning coffee. Only Josephine remained alone with the ticking clock and the faint breath of time. She still rose early out of habit, poured 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with cream, then stared at the second cup for a long moment, sighed softly, and poured it down the sink. That ritual had become a quiet, sorrowful ceremony she repeated each day. The house felt colder than ever. The old photographs on the walls seemed to fade faster, as if they no longer had the strength to hold on to memory. Each time Josephine passed by, she reached out and touched a frame, her fingertips trembling. "My son, where are you now?" No one answered. Only the wind whispered through the garden, making the yellow chrysanthemums nod in silence. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old journal. The pages near the front were filled with slanted, shaky handwriting. "Ethan is gone. I don't blame him. I only fear he'll never be able to forgive himself." Each line she wrote felt like a cut across her heart. But Josephine kept writing because it was the only way to remind herself that she was still alive. In the afternoon, she sat in the garden on the old wooden bench. Sunlight fell in soft patches on her silver hair. Neighborhood children ran past, laughing loudly. Their joy made her chest ache with both warmth and longing. She remembered Ethan as a child, remembered how he used to run barefoot through the grass with scuffed-up shoes, his laughter echoing in the sun. She smiled faintly. "Now I understand, my son." Her voice was barely more than a breath. "Some children don't come into our lives through blood, but through destiny." Josephine looked up at the sky, now shifting from gray to soft orange. Something inside her felt like it had broken, but also been released like a knot tied for years had finally come undone. Inside the house, the wind gently flipped the open journal. The last page, scrawled in smudged ink, read, "If one day you come back, I'll leave the door open. This house will always be yours." The first month after Ethan left, Josephine began writing letters. Not because she thought he would read them, but because if she didn't write, the longing inside her would swallow her whole. Every night, when the clock struck midnight, she sat at the wooden desk under the soft yellow light, pulled out a stack of old cream-colored paper. Her handwriting was shaky, but still elegant, neat just like the letters she used to write to George in her youth. The first letter, "Ethan, my son, I don't know where you are, what you're eating, if you're getting any sleep. Every morning I still make 2 cups of coffee, as if you might walk down the stairs, smile and say, 'Good morning, Mom.' I know you need time, but I want you to remember this house is still waiting for you to come back, even if only to sit quietly for one afternoon." She folded it and placed it in the wooden box on the desk. Then came the second letter when autumn arrived, and the wind turned the garden leaves golden and brittle. "Ethan, I feel myself aging faster since the day you left. But each time I see the chrysanthemums bloom, I feel a bit of peace. They still live, still blossom without anyone tending to them. Maybe I need to learn from them too, to live and wait for you, without needing a reason." A week later, she wrote the third letter. "My dear, I forgave you long ago. I just worry you haven't forgiven yourself. If you think love has to be perfect, you're wrong. It just has to be honest, and whether you're my blood or not, my love for you is real." Tears fell onto the page, blurring the word real. The room grew full of unstamped envelopes, each one holding a fragment of Josephine's soul. From time to time, she gathered them together, tied them into a bundle, and placed them in the drawer like someone saving words left unsaid, waiting for the day they could finally be delivered. One night, she dreamt of Ethan. He stood in the garden, moonlight soft on his face kind, just like when he was a boy. "Mom, I'm home." "Really?" she asked, voice trembling. "I just came to say, I still hear you." Josephine woke with a start, her pillow wet with tears. She sat up, heart pounding. Outside the window, it was still dark, but the faint scent of chrysanthemums drifted in, as if someone had just touched them. She smiled gently to herself. "Maybe you really did hear me, didn't you, Ethan?" December was bitterly cold. The sky was ash gray, and a fine drizzle fell like a sheer veil over everything. Josephine sat by the window, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders. On the table sat a neat stack of unsent letters, envelopes yellowed at the edges, worn with time. It had been 7 months since Ethan left. No letters, no messages, not a single sign that he still existed somewhere in the world. She had once told herself, if my son is still alive, all it takes is one call and I'll forgive everything. But the phone on the table stayed silent, like a meaningless ornament. Until that night. Josephine was making tea when the phone rang, ring, so sudden and loud it made her heart seize. She froze. The kettle hissed, steam rising into her face, but she felt nothing except the pounding in her chest. With trembling hands, she picked up the receiver. Hello. Silence. Only the sound of wind. Then a man's voice, low and hoarse with exhaustion. Mom. Josephine stopped breathing. Her entire body went still. Ethan, is that you? It's me, Mom. His voice cracked. I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. I've lost everything, but I'm still alive. I just wanted to know if you're okay. Josephine gripped the table's edge, her vision blurred with tears. I'm okay, sweetheart. The house is still here. I'm still here. I've been waiting for you every single day. Mom, I don't have the courage to come back. I don't deserve to. Ethan, she cut in gently, but firmly. There's no such thing as deserving or not. I never needed a perfect son. I just need you to be alive. Do you understand? There was silence on the other end, only the sound of a shaky breath. Then Ethan began to cry. I miss you. I miss home. I don't even know where to begin anymore. Start with the first step, Josephine whispered. Just come home. Will you take me back? The door is always open, my son. A quiet sob came through, and then the line went dead. Only the long, drawn-out tone remained. But Josephine stood there, still holding the receiver, her lips moving, a tearful smile spreading across her face. She knew that call didn't promise anything, no dates, no details. But in her heart, she felt something more certain than any words. Ethan would come back. She sat down and looked out at the garden. The yellow chrysanthemums were still blooming, trembling gently in the wind. In the empty house, the rain softened, as if even the sky had paused to listen to a fragile promise shared between two hearts once broken. One early spring morning, when dew still clung to the leaves and the sky was pale like an old cloth, Josephine heard a sound at the gate. She was making tea, her hands already trembling, but her ears recognized it immediately, the slow, familiar roll of wheels on the stone path. She didn't dare believe it. She stepped out onto the porch, each movement slow, her heart pounding. Out there, under the barely blooming yellow chrysanthemums, a man stood still. His shirt was wrinkled, shoes dusty, face weathered by the sun, beard unshaven, but his eyes. Those eyes were the same, warm, familiar, the eyes she thought she had lost forever. Ethan, Josephine whispered, her voice shaking. He looked up, and in that moment, the wind seemed to stop. Mom. Just one word, but it trembled like the shatter of 1,000 memories. They stood, looking at each other across the porch. No explanations needed. No words. The distance that had once stretched like an ocean between them was now only a few steps. Ethan walked forward. Each step carried the weight of years filled with regret. When he reached her, he lowered his head and spoke softly. I have nothing. No home, no money, no pride. But if you'll let me, I want to start over. Here. Josephine looked at her son, the man she had raised with love, not blood. She smiled gently, tears falling in silence. The house is still here, son. I never locked the door. Ethan choked up. He dropped to his knees before her, holding her frail hands. Mom, I'm sorry. Josephine ran her hand through his hair, her voice barely a breath. "It's all right, Ethan. Everyone loses their way once in life. What matters is you found your way back." Morning sunlight broke through the clouds, falling on them both, soft, warm, and trembling, like the hand of forgiveness. Ethan looked into his mother's eyes, and what he saw there wasn't blame, but a love so pure it brought him to tears. They sat together on the wooden porch bench, sipping tea in silence. No words, just the wind weaving through the garden, carrying the scent of yellow chrysanthemums, the same flowers that had once witnessed heartbreak, now witnessing healing. Josephine leaned back against the chair, lips barely moving. "George, do you see? He came back. After all." A soft breeze passed through. Chrysanthemum petals fluttered and danced in the morning light, gentle, like an unspoken reply. That year, spring arrived late, but when the chrysanthemums bloomed in the garden, Josephine knew it would be the last season she still had the strength to sit up and watch them. Ethan was there beside her, quietly caring for her each day. He tended the garden, fixed the roof, brewed morning coffee, and read the newspaper aloud. Those simple acts to Josephine were more precious than any promise. The house once again echoed with life-soft laughter, the clink of dishes, the wind carrying the scent of coffee through the kitchen, sounds she thought had been lost forever. One afternoon, Josephine called Ethan over and placed a small wooden box in his hands. "Here, this is for you." Ethan opened it. Inside were the letters she had written during the months he was gone, each one tied with a thin white ribbon. "Mom, you wrote all these for me?" "Yes," Josephine smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "I never sent them, because I was afraid you weren't ready to read them. But now, you've come home." Ethan held the bundle with trembling hands, tears rising. "Mom, I don't know how to ever repay you." "You don't have to," she whispered. "Just live kindly. That's the only thing that will bring me peace." Ethan nodded, his voice breaking. "I promise." Josephine smiled faintly, but deep inside, she knew her body was reaching its limit. The exhaustion lingered, her breath grew shorter each day. She wasn't afraid, there was nothing left to fear. Late that afternoon, Ethan helped her out to the porch. They sat side by side, watching the sun sink behind the trees. The orange-red light spilled across the chrysanthemums, casting the whole garden in the glow of a soft, peaceful fire. Josephine leaned her head against her son's shoulder, her voice barely louder than the breeze. "Ethan, you know, sometimes we have to lose each other before we can truly find each other again." Ethan gently squeezed her hand, his eyes glistening. "I know now, Mom. Now I truly understand." A sparrow flew by, landed briefly on the railing, chirped once, then flew off. Josephine watched it, gaze far away. "So beautiful," she whispered. "If one day I fly away too, don't be sad. I'll just be in the garden, watching over the flowers for you." Ethan turned to speak but stopped. The sunset lit up his mother's face, gentle, at peace, glowing like a candle just before it flickers out. The next morning, the sky was crystal clear. Sunlight slanted through the thin curtains, casting warm streaks of gold across the floor. In the kitchen, the kettle was still warm. 2 cups of coffee sat side by side, one black, one with cream, just like every other day. Ethan woke up and came downstairs. He smiled softly when he saw the steam still rising. "Mom, you're up early too." He stopped. Josephine was sitting on the wooden chair out on the porch, her wool shawl wrapped gently around her shoulders. Her face was calm, turned toward the garden of yellow chrysanthemums swaying in the breeze. Her eyes were softly closed. A faint smile touched her lips, as gentle as morning sunlight. Ethan called out quietly, "Mom?" No response. He stepped closer. A light breeze passed through, sending a few petals drifting down one of them, brushing her hand.
That hand was cold. The world fell silent. Ethan stood still for a long moment, then knelt beside her, holding her hand, eyes blurring with tears. "Mom, please wake up." "I haven't even said thank you yet." On the small table beside her was a folded piece of paper, the familiar slant of her handwriting. "To Ethan, my son. If you're reading this, it means I've gone. Don't cry, okay? I've lived a full life, one with tears, with love, and with you. You owe me nothing. If anything, it's me who owes you. You came into my life not to repay a bond of blood, but to teach me that true love doesn't require shared blood, only shared heartbeats. I leave this house to you, not because of what it's worth, but because it's the only place that truly saw us for who we are. And if one day you have a family, tell them that once there was a woman who loved her son not because she gave birth to him, but because she saw in his eyes the best part of herself. With all my love, Josephine." Ethan bowed his head, his tears falling onto the ink, blurring the words, but he kept reading again and again, every word, every period, etched into his heart. He looked up toward the garden. The chrysanthemums were in full bloom, glowing under the sunlight as if someone had just tended to them. The wind stirred gently, and he heard her voice, soft and distant. "This house is still yours." Ethan smiled through the tears. He stepped out into the garden, touched the petals, and for a moment it felt like her hand was still there. "I'm home, Mom, and I'm staying." The breeze stirred the flowers again, and the petals fell gently to the ground, each one like a tender, warm goodbye. 3 years passed. Josephine's old house had been repainted. The roof was new, and the windows opened wide to welcome the morning sun. But the front garden remained untouched. The golden chrysanthemums still lined the path, blooming in full each spring. Ethan cared for every flower with his own hands, just like his mother had for decades. On the porch, a little girl about 6 years old sat playing with dirt, giggling. Her hair curled slightly, and her round black eyes mirrored Ethan's from when he was young. "Daddy, why are these flowers called golden chrysanthemums?" Ethan smiled, wiped his hands clean, and sat down beside his daughter. "Because your grandma planted them," he said. "She used to say golden chrysanthemums never die. No matter the rain or cold, they'll bloom as long as there's a bit of sunshine." The little girl tilted her head, curious. "Did Grandma like them a lot?" Ethan looked out at the garden, where the breeze gently swayed the petals. Sunlight streamed through, golden and warm, just like his mother's smile once was. "Yeah, she loved them," he said softly. "She said every flower was a beautiful memory, and every time it bloomed again, it meant love had never really gone." The little girl picked a chrysanthemum and placed it gently on the table. "So this flower is my memory with Grandma, right, Daddy?" Ethan nodded, his voice low and tender. "That's right, sweetheart. And whenever you miss her, just come out here and look at the flowers. You'll see her smiling back at you." She grinned brightly, then suddenly pointed into the distance. "Daddy, I see a lady standing over there." Ethan turned. Out in the garden, in the brilliant sunlight, a faint figure stood, a woman with silver hair, wrapped in a wool shawl, gentle eyes watching him. He stood still, his heart tightening, then slowly smiled. "Yeah, that's your grandma." The little girl looked back at him, wide-eyed. "Really?" "Really," Ethan nodded. "She's still here, in the garden, among the golden flowers." The wind rose. Petals twirled in the air and landed in Ethan's palm. He closed his hand gently around them and whispered, "See, she's still watching over the flowers for us." The little girl beamed and wrapped her arms around her father. Ethan looked up at the clear blue sky. In his eyes was a peace he'd spent a lifetime searching for, a peace that only comes when you learn to forgive others.
and yourself. From a distance, a wind chime rang softly, mingling with the laughter of a child. The little house basked in the spring sunlight, no longer a place of buried secrets, but a place that told a story of a mother, a son, and a love that didn't need blood to be called family.